When looking at the American tank tech tree, it's very easy to assume that pretty much all of the tanks and vehicles fielded by the US Army are represented in game. However, despite having 112 vehicles in its tech tree, there are still a good number of US tanks and vehicles that still need to be introduced to War Thunder, even when not accounting for prototypes. In this video, I will be looking at some of these vehicles and why I think they should be added to War Thunder. The first of these is the M6 GMC, sometimes referred to as Fargo, an early attempt at a tank destroyer by mounting an M3 37mm gun onto a Dodge WC-55 truck, itself a modified WC-52 truck. As one might expect, this vehicle is completely unarmoured except for the gun shield, leaving the four-man crew consisting of a driver, gunner, loader and commander completely exposed to enemy fire at most angles, with the gun shield itself only providing limited protection against small arms and fragments. However, aside from this, the M6 does have a lot going for it. For example, at lower tiers, the practically identical M5 37mm gun is still competitive, being able to penetrate 65mm at 500 meters with AP shells, while having a fire rate of around 16 rounds a minute even with a stock crew. With the M6, this would possibly be even faster, due to not having to operate within a turret. With a height of only 2.1 meters, even smaller than the M2A4 light tank at 2.64 meters, this vehicle will excel at ambushing enemy tanks from concealed positions. The only thing that works against this vehicle in this regard is the gun shield, which somewhat prominently sticks up higher than the rest of the vehicle. The only downside to the M6 is that it can only really fire rearwards, with only a 60-degree horizontal traverse. In many ways, it is somewhat like the British Archer tank destroyer in this regard. However, this means you can set up your M6 in a way that you can fire and then quickly drive away before the enemy can respond. Speaking of speed, the M6 could reach a top speed of 55 miles per hour or 89 kilometers an hour, though of course you may have trouble reaching this speed off-road. Regardless, this nippy vehicle will have no trouble zipping around the battlefield. In real life, this vehicle didn't have much success due to the 37mm gun being obsolete by the time it saw action in 1942, with most of these vehicles being reconverted back into cargo trucks. But in War Thunder, this vehicle could have great success in the early tiers. When added to War Thunder, I think this could go at a battle rating of 1.3, fitting in just after the M8 HMC on the tech tree. Another vehicle that I would like to see added to War Thunder is the M3A1 Lee, a variant of the M3 Lee already in game. For the most part, this vehicle is the same as the M3 Lee, having the same armament, armour thickness, speed and crew complement, with the main difference being that the hull is cast instead of riveted. The main way of visually telling the two tanks apart is in the different and more curved shape of the hull, especially noticeable on the left side of the M3A1, where the shape here can potentially help in bouncing shells hitting this part of the tank. However, one of the big downsides to having a cast hull in real life is that while it is somewhat easier to manufacture, it provides less protection than the equivalent rolled homogeneous armour or RHA plate as used on the original M3 Lee. A fact some of you might not know is that this is something that is actually modelled in-game, with cast armour providing only 94% of the protection that an equivalent RHA armour plate would provide. In practice, this means that the M3 Lee's maximum hull armour thickness of 51mm is actually 48mm when represented by cast armour. You can actually test this yourself on the M3 Lee in-game, as it actually has a cast turret, which, despite being 51mm thick on the sides, only provides 48mm of protection. Similar differences can be seen between the RHA armour Shermans versus the cast armour Shermans. So why have the M3A1 in War Thunder? Well, the obvious choice would be to add it as a premium vehicle, which can be somewhat justified by its slower production run at only 300 tanks versus 4,800 or so of the regular M3. However, another option would be to add the M3A1 as a precursor to the M3 Lee, possibly at battle rating 2.3. The reason for this is that there is a huge gap in the medium tank lineup, with players moving on from the M2 at battle rating 1.3 suddenly finding themselves in the M3 at battle rating 2.7. An already difficult situation for new players, which is made worse by the fact that M3 Lee is a tank with two main weapons, which may take some getting used to. While this tank could manage fine at 2.7, I propose that by putting the M3A1 at 2.3, it could help ease new players into the 2-gun role without it being as overwhelming for new players or the M3A1 being as powerful as the M3 Lee. The main argument against this would likely be the inclusion of the 75mm gun at such a low battle rating, but with the M3 GMC being armed with this weapon at 1.7, I don't think a tank armed with this weapon at 2.3 is such a horrendous problem. One last vehicle that I think should be added to the US tank tech tree is the M38 Wolfhound armoured car, a vehicle that was supposed to replace the M8 Greyhound but was cancelled due to the end of World War II. The M38 was armed with the M6 37mm cannon, giving an in-game penetration of 65mm at 500 metres with AP shells. It had an elevation of -10 to +20 degrees. It also had 2 machine guns, one 30 cal coaxial machine gun, and, depending on the sources used, either one 30 cal or one 50 cal on the turret roof. The armour is pretty thin, with a maximum of 12.7mm, barely enough to stop even heavy machine gun fire. Though of course as a reconnaissance vehicle it should primarily rely on not getting hit in the first place. Unfortunately, even if you stay out of the way, the turret is open topped, meaning you will still be at risk to roving aircraft, though with your thinner armour even moderately armed aircraft will likely find you an easy target even without the open topped roof. Mobility is very good, with a top speed of 60 miles per hour or 96.5 kilometers an hour. It also has quite large tyres, which should be of some benefit when going cross-country, which is an area many armoured cars don't tend to do so well in. Crew complement is 4, consisting of a driver, gunner, loader and commander. As mentioned before, this vehicle was supposed to replace the M8 Greyhound, and was supposed to go into mass production. But with the end of the war there was simply not a need for this vehicle, meaning only a few were actually produced. But if the war had gone on longer, this vehicle surely would have gone into mass production, so it would be nice to see this vehicle represented in War Thunder. As for where it should go, I would suggest around 2.3, which is just below the M5A1's battle rating. I could see it being added as a premium vehicle, like most armoured cars in the US tank tech tree seem to be, especially as only a few were actually made. That said, I would like to see it somewhere on the main tech tree, as this was meant to be a fully in-service vehicle, which was only prevented by the end of the war. Either way, I would like to see this vehicle added to War Thunder in some fashion. So, having looked at these vehicles, I would like to hear in the comments which of these vehicles you would like to see added to War Thunder soonest. I would also like to hear your suggestions for future US vehicles that still need to be added to War Thunder. I personally would like to see the M6 GMC, as it's a fairly unique tank destroyer for the US tank tech tree, and despite not being very successful in real life, I think it would be a very fun and useful vehicle in War Thunder. So anyway, that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully you're joining me for the next video. I've been Terreno, and I'll see you next time.